alters the possibility of northern labor as a losing as a result of increased international trade with the South is in itself of some interest. There is a more subtle issue in the ongoing debate concerning North-South trade and wages. That is very much worth emphasizing here. There's evidence that developing countries in the South have comparative advantage in unskilled labor-intensive goods. If this is in that true, then according to the Stopper-Samuelson theorem, the northern workers who lose as a result of increasing north-south trade are actually unskilled workers. Labor losing as a result of trade labor increasing north to be many things supposed to increase trade. For example, the U.S. labor movement opposed both the North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA and the formation of the World Trade Organization or WTO. So here next, we talk about trade. The trade impact are suggested by the Stolper Summerson theory, namely that the northern unskilled workers lose because the north has a comparative advantage in skilled labor-intensive goods. That effect, however, tend to be smaller than the Stolper-Samuelson theorem would suggest. Why is it? So the first is there is some evidence that export-oriented industry in the north tend to pay higher wages than other industry. Consequently, the labor relocation caused by the increased trend tend to boost average wages. And the second is some north-south trade is based on higher labor productivity. It's a better technology in the north rather than difference in factory environments. So the last is the some north-south trade is intra-industry in nature and might therefore offer more adjustment opportunities to northern workers than inter-industry trade. So for this reason, although important trade is not the only source of the decline in relative wages of northern unskilled workers. Technology matters as well, and intra-industry trade might mitigate the standard of Stolper-Samuelson effect. The next is let's turn to the technology effect of north-south trade on northern unskilled workers. There appears to be an ongoing process of technological change in the north that increase demand for skilled workers and makes that workers more productive relative to unskilled workers. We know that many companies have used the computer to produce far more than equally skilled workers could have previously, also replacing to a large extent the unskilled workers whose tasks are taken over increasingly by intelligent machine. As a result, the productivity and wages of skilled workers rise, while those of unskilled workers do not. There is policy analyzed to the north with well-grounded concern about the plight of unskilled northern workers who call for the trade restrictions to address the effect of north-south trade unskilled wages in the north for a number of reasons. This is probably not the best policy approaches for and the first is the technology appears to be as important a factor as trade and fee policy analysis call for limiting technology change, and the second is trade. The restrictions will suppress overall gains from trade in both the north and south. The third is such restrictions could violate multilateral commitments made in the WTO, and the last is third reaction might harm unskilled workers in the South who are in more direct trade than their northern counterparts. Oh, sorry. So, those so um a more long-term and productivity productive policy approaches will be to over other forms of support to unskilled northern worker. This could be income support and more importantly support to increase capital assets. If there is one factor contributing to wages and income inequality in the north, it is the failure to complete secondary education. Remedying education failure is an important and neglected policy imperative in northern countries as well as in southern countries. Next is we talk about the role of specific factors. So a central uh, assumption of the hacker of Ohlin model and its Tupper Samuelson theorem is that resort of factors of production such as labor, physical capital, and land can move effortlessly among different sectors of trading economics. For example, Japanese researchers are assumed to be able to shift back and forth between rice and motorcycle production. The same is assumed to be true for Vietnam for some types of analysis, particularly that applying to the long run. This perfect factor mobility assumptions reasonable. So, in other instances, the assumption can be at odds with reality. Instead, factors of production can be sector specific, and it is this phenomenon that motivated the specific factors model and its approach to the political economic of trade. And the modification of the stopper summers on theorem in the fact of such specific factor is important to understanding the US steel and other similar cases. The modification is, follows factor of products. Next is uh, a modification of the Stolper-Samuelson theorem in the face of such specific factor is important to understanding the U.S. steel and other similar cases. The modification is as follows: factor of production that are specific to import sector tend to lose as a result of trade, whereas factor specific to export sector tend to gain as a result of trade. So these written skill action are not difficult to understand as a component and important sector that is characterized by sector-specific physical capital. Other owners of written skill that is forced them to lose as a result of increased trade. Consequently, the firm entered the import war to a term to reduce imports and protect the incomes of its specific factors. It is not always easy to keep the difference between specific and mobile factors in mind when assessing the political economic rate. For this reason, so we have to know this to help us. First is mobile factor of production. This Stolper summation theorem applies to the abundant factor of production and used intensively in the export sector chains, whereas the scarce factor of production used intensively in the important sector loses specific factor of production. The Stolper Samuelson theorems does not apply the factor of production specific to an export factor gains, whereas the factor production specific to the important sector loses. The fact of mobile factor is uncertain. When you come upon political economy of trade issues in any country of the trading world, it will be very helpful to us understanding if you were to first pause for a moment and try to identify the mobile or specific factor of production involved. And the conclusion is support for trade is not universal and protection from trade is common. Country-based explanation of the supply of protection can be found in realism and institutionalism. Explanation of the demand for protection can be found in factor-based and sector-based insight from the trade theory. And in this chapter, we have seen that the movement from autarky to trade in any country can hurt some groups of people in the country, according to the Stopper Samuelson theorem of the hackers or Lean model. This can be as a result of owning a factor of production that is scarce in their country. Alternatively, it can also be a result of owning a factor specific to an import sector. Suppose the losing groups become unhappy with the level of trade in the country, and at the times opposition to trade and demand for the protection can be an expression of culture issue. This is evidence the quote at the beginning of the chapter. It is important to recognize the culture and economic factor work side by side in many nation contexts, and the analysis of this chapter help us to understand the economic factor, where the effect of the protective practices that developing in the market for protection. We will find out the next chapter. Thank you. Not yet. Thank you. That's all for us. Thank you again.
So hello guys. Now I will explain about the comparative advantage again that already explained in the last few weeks. So it takes with the same example in Vietnam and Japan that economies move from the autarky to trade and production in each country expand in the direction of the sector in which it was comparative advantage. So this is the graph, as you can see. It moved from the A to B along the production possibility frontiers in the graph below. Rice production expand in Vietnam and motorcycle production expand in Japan. The purpose of the chapter is to analyze the processes much more carefully. So the next one, I will explain about the trade factors and of the production. Vietnam, relatively land abundant. By this, we mean that ratio of the land to physical capital is larger in Vietnam than in Japan. The relative abundance of land gives Vietnam a comparative advantage in producing the land-intensive good. Example is rice. And then Japan is relative capital abundant. By this, we mean that the ratio of physical capital land is larger than Japan than in Vietnam. This relative abundance of the capital gives Japan comparative advantage in producing the capital-intensive good. For example, it's motorcycle. As you can see in the picture below, is the two is the motorcycle produced in Japan and the two picture of the Vietnam rice farmer. Okay, then in this slide, I will explain about this diagram. In this, you can see a country export the good whose production is intensive in abundant factor. It import the good whose production is intensive in scarce factor. As a country move from autarky to trade, the country's abundant factor of the production gains, whereas the country's scarce factors of production loses. Opposition to trade or demand for protection therefore arises from scarce factor of production. From the tables, you can see there's Vietnam and Japan. Vietnam is a relative land abundant and Japan is relative capital abundant. The next two boxes concern the pattern of the comparative advantage. Vietnam have advantage in rice. because the land intensive. Japan has the comparative advantage in motorcycle because the capital intensive. The third level of boxes concerns the trade flows. In accordance with the pattern of the comparative advantage, Vietnam export rice to Japan and Japan export motorcycle to Vietnam. In Vietnam, the comparative advantage in rice causes an increase in the output of rice and expense of motorcycle. Consequently, there is an increase in demand for land and decrease in demand for the physical capital. This factor demand changes have the result that landowners in Vietnam gain from trade, whereas Vietnam capital owners lose from the trade. And for Japan, the comparative advantage in motorcycle caused an increase in the output of motorcycle at the expense of rice. Consequently, there is an increase in the demand for the physical capital and a decrease in the demand for land. These changes caused Japan capital owners to gain from trade and Japan land owners to lose from the trade. That is all for my presentation. And next will be continued by my friend. Thank you.